Team, how are we? Welcome to another episode of the High Performance Coach podcast. Today, we have another incredible guest, somebody who I have a huge amount of admiration, respect, and appreciation for. Somebody that I've watched from afar for a little while and then had the absolute honor of heading over to Belfast to speak at his event last year. And I have to say, I love energy and creating a room that has an aura that is incredibly powerful. And when I stepped into that room, I knew from Belfast Airport already from about 30 miles away what I was stepping into. I could smell it, the difference just in the connection, the energy, the collaboration, and just the sense of belonging and the togetherness from the people that were in that room was unbelievable. And the devil that was in the detail and the lengths that you went to, mate, completely blew me away. So off the back of that, we had the absolute pleasure of obviously going to dinner together, had some great conversation, and mate, it's been absolutely unreal to watch you continue to go from strength to strength. So Mr. MJ Lennon, how the devil are you? And welcome to the High Performance Coach podcast.
What a hell of an intro, mate. I don't know if I can live up to that introduction. Like, that was incredible, but yes, thank you very much. And likewise, Joe, this community are extremely fortunate to have someone like yourself at the head of it. So it has been an absolute pleasure, mate. And I don't know if I can take all the credit for the energy at the room in the summit. So for any of your listeners that don't know Martin Rooney, he was one of our keynote speakers along with yourself, and that man's energy would light up the entire island. So I don't know if I can take full credit for that, but thank you very much.
Mate, we'll actually come on to Martin in a little while and we'll explore like what it is that you now believe, because I think there's so much that's almost like incalculable that you almost can't explain, but there's like an aura and an energy and a presence. But before we talk about Martin, mate, what do we now need to know about MJ? What's made him the man that he is today?
Well, what a question to start off. So I suppose a bit of background. I come from what you guys would know to be a council estate, and probably one of the very worst council estates in Northern Ireland. And the reason for that was because it's surrounded by a 60-foot wall. Literally, my house was the peace line. So where I grew up, I used to have drop bars on my doors, and I used to have steel grids on all of the windows on my house, because my house was directly on the peace line between what would be Republicans, nationalists, and loyalists, unionists, Protestants in Northern Ireland. So for anyone that knows the history, I mean, they'll be pretty familiar with that. You know, we're on the news quite regularly. And so, like I say, my house was right on that front, and a large part of where I grew up was, I was born in 1984, so I grew up in the very midst of the Troubles in Northern Ireland, in Belfast, in one of the worst hit communities. It was surrounded by 60-foot walls. It's a very close-knit community, albeit crime, rioting, just everything that came with the Troubles, the poverty, like you name it. And so that influenced a lot of my early days. I didn't do well at school. I wasn't great academically. And I left school quite early because I wanted to go and work and I wanted to earn money. So my father owned a pub in Belfast city centre, and he has done for the last 30 years now. So he owned the pub in the midst of the Troubles as well, which, as you can imagine, was quite eventful. And so, I spent much of my early working days working there. And by the way, for anyone that works in a pub, they will know that it is a crash course in human nature. Like, if you want to see the worst of people, just go and work in a pub for a few weekends, and that will inform you. But that made up a large part of my early days. That was my developmental stages. And rather than, I suppose, letting that dictate the rest of my life and how it would, what my outcomes would be, I always asked for more. I always asked questions. I always thought that if someone else can do it, then so can I. And there's been people, listen, don't get me wrong, there's been people that have been in situations that have been a million times worse than mine, and they were able to do it. And so if they can, then so can I. And that's the way I've always thought about it. So yes, hopefully that informed some of your listeners as to where I started.
And what was the catalyst for you, obviously, on that journey, on that path that then took you down the route of fitness? Because it sounds like obviously working in a pub and obviously being within that environment, you could have been easily swayed now into a different way.
Yeah, you don't mind if we go dark a little bit here, mate, do you? I promise I will bring the energy up, because this story ends quite well, right? So I end up getting into, quite a leadership role in the pub. Like I said, working in a pub, it is a crash course in human nature, and I'm a quick learner when it comes to people, and I learned how to deal with drunk people, and so I get into a bit of a leadership role quite quickly. Like by 18, I was managing the pub, and you're managing people that grew up in the Troubles, right? So their life has been traumatic. So you can imagine the type of people that you're dealing with on a daily basis. But I get into a leadership role, and I actually, on the job, so I lost one of my co-workers, and he was a father. He was in his late 40s, Scotch Joe, shout out to him, absolute legend. And so he got into a fight after his shift, and he hit his head on the curb, and he lost his life, and he had 2 children. And so that impacted me on a personal level, and it still does today, right? But they say that everything happens for a reason. I made a conscious decision after seeing how that impacted his children to say, this can't, there has to be something better than the life that I'm living, right? And so I took that away, and I was like, right, I need to go a different direction, because I'm watching people every single day and they are deteriorating. You can literally see their physical presence atrophy, in the place that they're living, in the environment they're in. And so, well, what can I do that's the opposite? I was an amateur boxer, and I was a pretty good amateur boxer. I boxed internationally and stuff. And I was like, well, I love fitness and I always have. So let me forget about this. And instead of watching people deteriorate, let me use the skill set that I've got to build them up. Right. And so I was like, well, I'm going to leave this role. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to be in this environment. Let me apply myself and see where I can take this. And so straight away, I was like, I'm going to open a gym. There was no way that I was going to go and work in a commercial gym or anything like that, because I was too used to, I didn't deal well with authority. I left school at 15. And so I was like, right, I'm going to open a gym. And from there, I kept on just wanting to grow. We started off in my old boxing gym. My coach was kind enough to let me take classes in there, and we had built up enough capital to open up our first facility, which was over 2 floors, and then we expanded that. And next thing, because I was investing in my education quite a bit, I had, gathered up all of this knowledge, education, and information, and then I started to share it with other people, and then coaches were coming to me and they were paying me to coach them, and I was like, okay, well, maybe I can just do this for a living as well. And so that just escalated, and we expanded for a third time. And on one of my, just to round this story off, on one of my courses, I would quite often get our students up to tell the story of where they came from, how they got here, what they want to achieve in the fitness industry. And so one day we were sitting, and this was a group of people that had just come in. And this was like 20, no, it wouldn't be that. It was maybe, I want to say, about 8, 9 years after I had left the pub. And so this group of students come in, and there was this young lad, and he got up and he started telling his story about how he arrived at ECA. And he started telling the story about how he lost his father not far from where we were sitting. And so I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it just now. And I was sitting there and I was like, let me check this kid's name. And I checked his name, and it was Owen O'Neill. And I'm like, my heart just sunk, because Scotch Joe, RIP, his son, who I hadn't seen since his father's funeral, didn't know that it was me, but found his way to my academy. And so now, even still today, he came through the fitness industry. He's still in the fitness industry. And I still, on that day, while he told the story and he was almost in tears, I pulled out a mask card, and it was his father's face on it. And I just walked up to him and showed him it. And he was like, why do you have this? And I was like, bro, like, I worked with your father. This, like, my name is and he pieced two and two together, and he was like, what the hell is going on here? So this kid that I seen at his father's funeral almost like was the catalyst for my decision to go down the fitness route. Lost contact with him over 8, 9 years, and he shows up at my academy 8, 9 years later wanting to become a personal trainer. Isn't that insane? Like, still to this day, whenever I tell that story, it's like, it's almost disbelief.
If you could go back to the MJ that made the decision and the commitment to now be able to make that change in that moment, and obviously now step into the step into the industry, and like decide to almost cut the umbilical cord from what you've been used to step into obviously a new, what lessons would you have taken? What lessons do you take from that man that decided to make that pretty challenging choice? Because I suppose although there was obviously a big reason for change, you're also stepping into something that was completely uncertain, uncharted for you, and was something that was almost unknown.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing was for me at the time, but I think that I was seeking approval from my father, which was the reason why I hadn't made the decision earlier. And I heard someone say the other day that you only truly become a man when either your father dies or when you cut off your your need for approval from him. And so I think that at that time, that was the reason why I hadn't made the decision much earlier. I waited until some sort of traumatic experience happened in order to fuel the decision. Whereas I don't know, had I made the decision earlier, would things have been any different? But I think the biggest thing would be, don't wait until something traumatic happens. Like, if there's something that you're if you find your purpose, if you find a thing that you really want to do, like, don't wait on that experience, just pull the trigger straight away. And also, like, don't wait until the real life father passes to stop seeking approval, because I think that you'll gain the respect from them eventually if you make the decision ahead of time.
You said obviously you stepped into a leadership role quite early. How do you believe that served you, obviously, in the growth and expansion of ECA?
So purely from a tactical standpoint, I think understanding customer experience for one, but also we did deal with quite a few extreme situations. And so having had those experiences in the past, there's everything else is quite easy. When you've lost a good friend and a colleague, dealing with everything else that you could possibly deal with in business is quite simple. And there was nothing that would ever really hurt more than that. There's nothing that anyone could do to me today that would impact me more than something like that, especially, things like that happening under my watch. So I think that that's probably, if we were to say, if there was anything positive that would come from that experience, that would be it, is that I would be pretty equipped to deal with most things that business could throw at you today. Because you'll know this, Joe, we all get so hung up on, the sort of the obstacles that business throws at us, and we think that it's the end of the world, when if you put it into context, it's not really. Like, no one has died. You didn't close a sale, it's not the end of the world. You didn't hit your monthly targets, it's not the end of the world. Like, everyone is still safe, your family still love you. And so, having had that experience and being able to carry that into my own entrepreneurial journey, it's kind of like, well, everything is pretty easy, to be fair.
What do you think has changed? Because obviously initially there was a huge driving force that you're almost like running away from. But I sense that now, especially with the impact, and I only had to have dinner with you and also have other people that I was speaking to that were speaking about you, just acknowledge and appreciate obviously this abundance in terms of what you're now almost like running towards and the impact that you now want to be able to create with what it is you're trying to do. Like, what do you think has shifted for you, or when do you believe that shift happened or occurred?
Yeah, uh I can't think of one instance where there was a complete shift in me. I think that initially, whenever I first started, obviously, as you quite rightly pointed out, I was running away from something, but there was also like my activation energy was probably just fear, ego, envy, like all of the worst sort of emotional responses that you could have. Like that was the thing that was driving me back then. And then I just think through time and all these little consistent touch points. Because initially, when you're running away from something and that is your activation energy, it's very much self-serving. It's about you and how you want to make a better life for yourself. And it's a very ego-driven way to start things off, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing, because whether let's say you decide to start a fitness business because you're envious of another trainer who has all of this stuff, right? And he's so successful and he only works 2 hours a day and he's got the Rolex and the Lambo, and it's like, I want all of that stuff. You're still going to have to help other people to get that regardless. And if your initial thing is ego because you want something that someone else has, at the end of the day, you're still going to have to help people with their nutrition, their training, and their accountability in order to get that. So there is something that positive that will come from that. And that's what I found very early on. So even though it was kind of self-serving, I still helped a lot of people. So win-win either way. But yeah, eventually I think the more that I seen how much it impacts other people, then in fact, I remember one particular thing that one of my mentors said to me at the time, because I started then, obviously you'll know this yourself, Joe, and your audience will know this. In the early days, it's like you're all about coaching. You just want to become a better technician. Because again, sometimes that can be quite self-serving because your ego says that you're the best coach out there, right? And that's the way I started out. But then after a while, it was like, right, shift. How do I just help more people? And I was at an event, I think it was in San Diego, and there was a guy there, and he was a sales guy, and I was asking him how to improve my sales process and everything else. And he had asked me at the time what we were making, and it was under 10K a month. And he said to me, "Oh, sorry for my language, by the way." He says, "Oh, you're a selfish bastard." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he was like, "By not doing 25K a month, it's because you're being selfish." And I was like, "I don't understand. Would that not mean that I'm being selfish?" And he was like, "No, because if you were, you would be helping more people." And that's just one instance. There's, I think all along the way, there's all these little things that happen that sort of nudge you in a different direction. And you're like, he's right. Well, I was making this about me the whole time because I wanted to be a better coach. But when you put it in that way, I need to stop making it about me, and I need to stop making it about the people that I'm supposed to be here to serve.
What impact do you think has traveling far and wide, which I know that you've done,
Yeah.
to invest in mentors, courses, and to go and do the things that the majority of others now haven't kind of done that were in that space at that time? What did that give you?
So I always say to people that really and truly, there's only three things that you will own in your lifetime. It's education, experience, and excellence, as in the amount of excellence that you show up with, or how committed you are, the amount of energy and enthusiasm that you can dedicate to anything. And so if you look at most millionaires, and this probably has happened more than what people think, most millionaires will at some stage lose all of their money and regain it back again, sometimes from nothing, from less than nothing, right? And it's because number one, they have the education to do it, they have the experience, and in order to do it again, they will show up with excellence, energy, and enthusiasm, right? And so, at least for me personally, I know like there's nothing could convince me otherwise. Like if I lost all of my companies tomorrow, if I lost all of my business, no gym, anything like that, it would probably take me 90 days in order to get back to exactly where I was at before. Exactly where I was at before. Like, I've no doubt about that whatsoever. It would take me around about 90 days. And so having gone through all of those experiences, having gotten that education, I know for a fact that all I would need to do would be show up with the same intentions, energy, enthusiasm, i.e. the amount of excellence that I would need to bring to the table in order to get back to where I was previously. So it's so comforting to know that you've just gone through that whole journey, so that, you know, if shit goes sideways, I mean, really and truly, you don't own all of your material things anyway. And if they get taken away from you, you know how to get them back. And it's just a comforting feeling, and that's it.
What confidence does that give you in the decisions that you then make as a leader and as a business owner?
Yeah, I mean, we'll say competence first and foremost, because that, you know, that comes through time. But yes, with that comes confidence, because I'll probably get a bit of shit from this, but when you've been in the trenches and people say, oh, it's only running a fitness business, you're not really in the trenches. But it's like, it is, you know, mentally, when you've been doing it for 15, 16 years, you've been in the trenches for a long period of time. You've had the tombstone days, as I like to call them, for years, you know. And so I think that because of that, then it gives me the confidence to know that there's nothing that I am not going to be able to deal with in future. For example, right? So I have a friend, and just lately there, his company went into insolvency, right? And so it was a historical thing. I think it was going on for quite a few years. But anyway, he rang me up, and it was panic stations on his end. And he was like, oh, I'm going to lose this, and this is going to happen, and so on and so forth. And I was like, tell me everything that happened. What way did this break down? What was the whole scenario? What was the process? What was the phone call? And he sat and he explained it all to me, and I smiled, and I was like, okay, good. So get in touch with this person, tell them to do this, say this, say this. 2 days later, he was back in his facility, opened up and trading again. 2 days later, right? And he messaged me and he was like, bro, like, what just happened there? Because in his mind, that was it. Everything was gone. And I was like, to me, it was just another one of those, because I've been through this, mate. Like, I know exactly what you're going through. I know what you're experiencing. He wanted to retreat. He just wanted to go dark, not communicate, do nothing. And that was the worst way that he could have dealt with it. You know, he just didn't want to speak to anyone. And I just gave him a nudge in the opposite direction, and I was like, trust me on this, just go and do this, and he was back up and running. So it's things like that, you know, having had all of those experiences and, you know, in the past, it just gave me so much confidence that in future, that no matter what happens, as long as your intentions are perfect, and as long as you never hit the panic button, you never go dark, and you never like, never give up on what is important to you, success is inevitable. It may take a long period of time, but it's inevitable anyway.
But I think that comes back down to the game that you're playing. Results are always in the weight, and the challenge and the friction that you're currently facing is the resistance and the price that you have to pay. And actually, one of the things that really changed in my mind was, you know, sometimes you're going on a journey and like, it's just like problem, challenge, setback, problem, challenge, setback. And you're like, I'm putting in so much effort, so much intention. I'm trying to do this from the right place. And you just feel as though you're just met with like punch in the face, punch in the face, punch in the face. Instead of thinking, why is this happening to me? It's like, where's the opportunity in this? And then also the big acknowledgement for me was like, actually, this is the path. And the challenges that I'm currently facing are a prerequisite for the success and the results I now want to be able to see. But it's just appreciating within that moment, this is now another test and another opportunity in terms of, are you going to behave to where you now want to be? What does that now look like? And how is this building your character? So when these things now arise again, which they will, and probably bigger and uglier, it doesn't get easier, you just get better. And from what I take from what you've just communicated, it's like, as you grow, as you expand, as you go from one facility to two facilities to three facilities to franchise to then building obviously another anchor of the business, you then hire a team and you obviously start to ascend that ladder. It doesn't get easier. You just simply get better, and your capacity to be able to tolerate load, that extremity expands your capacity. And then how you normalize things and your ability to regulate emotions becomes so much greater, which means that you can take action faster and fail forward fast with more competence and confidence in your own ability, because you now know that there's evidence of what's happened previously, and you will be able to make shit happen if you just keep focusing on what's my next action, what do I need to do, and who do I now need to be, and how do I need to behave in order for me to be able to get to that next step. And I think great thing to be able to think about is that almost that inversion thinking. What would I do right now if I wanted to stay stuck? What would I do right now if I basically didn't want to move forward? And sometimes that's an easier frame to look through, because sometimes you can't see the answers, but it's like, what's everything that I wouldn't do right now? All right, I'll start doing the opposite of that. And that's what I hear from this dude.
Yeah, totally agreed, man. Totally agreed. I mean, you know, I actually heard this the other day was, you know, the way that they say the bad things happen in threes, not truly the case, right? So if we look at someone and they're like, oh, my girlfriend left me, okay? And so it's not the thing, it's the thinking about the thing that usually dictates the next actions. And so what happens is the person goes, my girlfriend left me. Now I'm sad and I'm depressed. And so they stop showing up to the rest of their relationships with the same energy as what they did previously. And so they then go into work and their boss is like, you're not turning it on here. Like, what's your issue? Here's a written warning. Right. And it's like, I know, but my girlfriend left me. I'm sad. I'm depressed. And it's like, boss doesn't care. Boss wants results. So next thing, they're still in the same, they're still showing up with the same energy. And the boss is like, right, I'm done. You're gone. And they blame the universe. They blame some sort of karmic justice, and then they lose their job. And next thing, their car is repossessed. And they're like, oh my God, bad things happen in threes. And it's like, no, the first thing happened. How you reacted to the first thing happened, which is what led to you losing your job and then your car. So it's not the thing, it's the thinking about the thing. You just turned to shit after the first thing, right? Now, obviously, hopefully none of your listeners have had to go through that, but this happens in business, for example, right? You get a surprise tax bill sent out to the house and you're like, oh my God, the world hates me. HMRC is out to get me. The universe is conspired against me. And so you go dark and you're like, how am I going to figure this out? Then you stop doing your marketing and you stop doing your follow-ups and you stop doing your sales because you got this HMRC bill. And next thing you know, not only have you got a tax bill, surprise one coming through the door, now you've got no leads and you've got no follow-ups done. Right. And next thing now, for your next product launch, there's no one showed up to it. And it's like, oh my God, bad things happen in threes. It was like, no, the first thing just happened, but how you reacted to it is what led you down the path of this current situation that you're now in. Whereas had you reacted to the first thing and said, okay, how am I going to figure this out while still doing this and still doing this? And you're being proactive instead of reactive to each situation, you're on a different path and you'll find yourself in a different position in future. So you're like, if you can just do the work regardless of whatever shit gets thrown at you, you're likely to get a more positive outcome in future, in which case then all of the dark days will become less. And what is it Phil Brady says, winter miles, summer smiles. Right. So if you can just put in the winter miles, eventually what you're going to get is some summer smiles down the line. But it just comes down to being a little bit resilient, resourceful, resilient, and relentless. And what you're going to find is that in future, you will have better outcomes.
On the topic of Phil Brady
Yes.
and things that he said
Yes.
something to me the other day when I was on a call with him, and I said, mate, what are you training today? And he said, arms and chest, fuck the rest. That's what MJ is saying. And I was like,
I gotta copyright that one. I gotta copyright that one.
Honestly, I was like, I was like, I've never heard that before, but I was like, that is literally my new. I was like, that is my new thing. So, mate, whilst we're on the subject of that, Mate, I absolutely love that. There's a couple of pieces. Number one, obviously speaking about the friend, just the power of actually now being able to have the right people around you who can actually regulate your emotions and actually allow you to think differently. And you now feel like you can trust as a companion that can give you the guidance and the advice that you can lean into, or even just the space to now be able to just have the opportunity to sit in the mud with you whilst you're going through that challenge. I think the power of that is just absolutely, well, we all stand on the shoulders of giants in all in every aspect of our life. I think the second piece that you picked up on, and we spoke about it obviously at the start with Martin, you've spoken obviously about the energy before, the activation energy, obviously the energy of basically the intentions that you now set, and obviously spoke about obviously that Martin. What do you now believe? You've been obviously around a lot of like high performing individuals. What do you now believe like really makes up that energy that they now embody and possess when they walk into a room? What is it that you now feel as though that has been the ingredients that's helped them present that?
I think so. The big thing that I suppose for any of your listeners that aren't familiar with Martin, because I think that this guy epitomizes this, and I think you and I completely agree on this. And this was one of the reasons why it was purely selfish reasons why I brought him to Belfast, because he had done all of the things that I want to do. And so I was like, well, I want to learn from that guy because he's had like 500 locations, licensees worldwide. He speaks on stages all over the world. He's written books. He's just done so much in the fitness industry. And so I was like, well, I want to learn from that guy. And I had met him before through my travels when I was going to the US, and I knew what his energy was like, and I knew how he could hold a room. And so for selfish reasons, that's why I wanted him over to learn from. But then to pass on to my community, I also wanted them to experience what I had experienced in the past. So I think the biggest thing that I took away from him was his white belt mentality, right? So for any of your guys, I'm sure there's going to be a few listeners here that do a bit of jiu-jitsu. It's quite popular these days. I love jiu-jitsu. I train it 4 and 5 days a week. And Martin, albeit is 30 years deep into his career in the fitness industry, and you'll remember he sat and took notes from every single speaker there. And when he came back to me, he was like, "Oh, here, I wanna ask Joe what he meant by this here. Right? I want to see what he said. Like, what do you think he would say about this here?" And he was asking me things about his presentation. He was saying, "Do you think this would come across well? What do you think will happen if I say this here?" And he was just so focused on getting it all right. And the wheels were just constantly spinning. And by the way, this was someone who flew from, I think, just outside New York. He was on an overnight flight. And when he arrived in Dublin, I picked him up and he was like, "Okay, where are we going?" And he wanted to know everything about the culture in Northern Ireland. And he wanted to know why they fly this flag and why they fly this flag. And then he related that to, when he was talking on stage, he related that to gyms and the type of culture that they have within the facility. And I was just like, Jesus, this man is on it. But his white belt mentality, as in, and metaphorically speaking, but then he also is a judo black belt and a jiu-jitsu brown belt, but he still has that type of mentality. And so I think for me personally, one of the it's almost like childlike curiosity, right? So if you show up with that type of energy, you can't go wrong, because it's actually, so I tell people this all the time, one of the biggest killers in business is self-consciousness, right? And the cure for self-consciousness is curiosity, right? It's impossible to be self-conscious when you're curious and you're just asking questions. And so if you always approach it in that way, then you can't go wrong. And if you just accept, if you're, a continuous learner, if you've got a white belt mentality, you're just like, well, I don't know. Someone could inform me better. This could be the case. Someone probably sees something different to what I see it right now. And let me find out if they do. Even if they're not ahead of you, you can still find out. You can still find out what they see, what they say, how they would do it differently. And I think that just gives you so much freedom as well.
The thing that epitomized it for me was I turned up and there was one of your students who was speaking just before, and she had just opened her gym. She was 1 year in. It was the first ever time that she'd ever spoken on stage. She was incredibly nervous. She did an amazing job. I thought she was phenomenal in her delivery, and you just saw her grow in her confidence as she started to just deliver and find our flow. And I sat behind Martin, and he was just taking notes, and he was locked in. And this is a guy, like you say, 500 locations. He's at an event. He's obviously done a couple of speaking gigs. He's obviously traveled from the other side of the world. And now there's one of your students, first year, just opened her first gym, just sharing some of her lessons and her stories for the first ever time. And he was just engrossed. And I just thought, for me, like, it's not what you say, it's what you do. And that, for me, just set a whole new level of standard. Like, it didn't have to say anything. And that really embodies just exactly as you've communicated, and just the embodiment of, this isn't a temporary thing. This is who you are. And I say this to coaches often. It's like, for me, it's not like this is Joe and then this is kind of like what I do. It's like, no, this is basically as one. And for me, how can I now really live within that and step into that as much as possible? And I've got a lot of work to do. But that, for me, with Martin, would just allow me just to appreciate that this isn't some type of transactional process. This isn't some type of, how do I make a few bucks, or how do I, like, this is like, I live and breathe this. I immerse this. I am engrossed. I'm forever like a student, and I can learn something from everybody. And I think that gave even me just, all right, Joe, there's levels and there's levels, my friend. There's levels and there's levels. And it's not about what you say, it's actually how you behave and how you show up, and the attention that you give, and the intention that then you bring obviously in with that says more than anybody could ever say.
Yeah, I mean, it set the bar higher for us all, and you're right. It's not any kind of front. Like, it just is. Like, he lives and breathes it. And while the rest of us will probably always be playing catch up in that sense, it's good because it gives you something to contrast with. It gives you something to go, geez, like, that guy has done so much. And if I want to even get close to anywhere near that type of success, that's what it's going to take. I think it's amazing. So rather than being put off by it, or detracted by it, I think use it as that's the barometer. That's where I want to get to right there.
Without a shadow of a doubt. And I think you look at it through the lens of, okay, like, how can I trade Jack? What is it? Because again, a lot of it isn't that piece isn't skill, that's just sheer kind of like will and who you are. I think when you can do that, it's so powerful. And I think if you go back to what you've just said in terms of like what you spoke about in terms of your journey, even think about the masters, like, okay, it's like what you think, what you say, and what you do. There's more congruency, there's alignment. And when you can do that, it allows you to operate in this space of like, just, I think, authenticity. It's like, this is who I am. And when you have that breeds that confidence, because it allows you to, well, it's built on a foundation of evidence based upon the way in which you've now been able to behave. And that, for me, is just so powerful. And the energy and the aura that you get from that is incredible. And I spoke to our coaches about this a couple of weeks ago, and I said, I go into your gym, right? And there's a feeling, there's an energy, there's an aura, there's a vibe, and there's this like, I'm like, what is it? And you're like, I don't know. Do you know what I mean? You can't almost explain what it is, but it's just something. And then you go into another gym and you're like, might even have better quality equipment. Yeah. And like all the bells and the whistles and everything else. And you go in and there's just something like, yeah, it was all right.
Yeah.
But something that I just, maybe go back there, but just something that's just missing. And it's that, for me, it's that feeling and that energy that is just the sense that you get whenever you walk into a two similar restaurants. One, you're like, wow, I could eat here all the time. And that you just feel, and there's another one, it's like, that was okay, but I wouldn't rush back. you know?
Yeah.
And I think that as well just really comes back down to like the work that one does on their self, and then ultimately what they're presenting and what they're giving to the world in the space and the container that they're wanting to be able to create. But you can now only do that if you're now willing to be led in the first place, and then you're able to step up and lead because you're clear over who you are, what you stand for, what you don't stand for, and ultimately what's the problem that you want to solve and what you're doing this for, and then how can you bring and take other people on this journey, which is from what I've seen with the franchise and obviously now the personal training academy you've been able to step into with ECA. So dude, I'd love for the listeners to be able to understand even more so the vision and the mission you have with ECA and how it's been able to grow and evolve from you now leaving the pub to opening a gym to where it is today, and what have been some of the key steps you've taken.
Yeah, so I was sort of doing my research over, a number of years, and I was looking at what's the entry level education for personal trainers. And no disrespect to, wherever they do it, but it wasn't the greatest. And I was like, okay, rather than it being like some sort of necessary evil, which I kind of got the sense that it was, I was like, well, I want to change that. To me, it seemed like a problem. And although I left school at 15 because I didn't like authority, I still love education, right? And it's something that I hold, like it's a value of mine. And so I was like, well, this can't be right. Like I want to pass more on. There's better ways to do this. And I think it was very much born out of frustration, and probably again a little bit of ego, envy, all of those, let's say, negative emotions that you want to take with it. But I think that just like opening a gym, it has led down a positive path and one that's no longer self-serving. It was born out of frustration to begin with, but now it's very much, I think we have helped a lot of people with it, and that's the main driver. I think a lot of uh, even for example, just based purely on the stats and figures that we get back, I want to say in Belfast alone, like there's per square foot, in a mile radius, there's probably more small group PT gyms than in anywhere in the UK or Ireland, right? And a lot of that has been down to, it's a fact, been down to what we've been producing in the academy over the last 8 years. A lot of our past students have gone off and done amazing things, opened their own facilities, helped and impact thousands of people. Even some of our online coaches, they're absolutely crushing it as well. And it's just like, for me, like having that ripple effect where I get to have at least a little bit of input in someone's journey later down the line. Like that's the main driver today. I get to inadvertently help thousands of people. If some of our students do uh great stuff, which they do, and they go and their message gets out there and it spreads, it's getting in front of a lot of people, and I love that. That lights me up, that gets me up in the morning. That's now my activation energy. Like I absolutely adore that process. When I see a student passing on a message that they have maybe picked up from a Phil, for example, arms and chest, fuck the rest. I don't know how many people that's gonna help, but when he says that, I'm like, amazing. And so yeah, that journey has been progressing over the last few years. I wanted to, there's only a certain number of people that we can reach within our facility in Belfast. And so then I was like, well, we've had a lot of A players come through the academy. Let me reach out to some of those guys because they live in Lithuania and they live in Dublin and Donegal and all these other places. And so I reached out to them and I said, hey, you were an outstanding student when you were with us. Would you like to carry this message further? And some of those guys have been doing that. They're in very early stages. Some of them are a year in at this point in time, but so far they've been able to carry the type of culture that we created at ECA when they were there, because they've been through it, they've experienced it, they've had that sort of that feeling, as you quite rightly said. And yeah, it's been a journey. It's been quite challenging, I'll be honest, getting the franchise up and running. But most of it, I'm just like, it's another one of those, I've been through it in the past. So even though it's more challenging than most of the other stuff, because I have had experience in it before, it's like, yeah, I mean, we'll deal with this. It'll work itself out. It won't work itself out, but you get what I mean.
What have you had to let go of, or how have you had to adapt and challenge your thinking on in order for you to be able to surrender to what you're saying?
Ah, oh my God. Um, so there's skills, traits, and beliefs is what have to evolve in order for your self and your business to evolve. From a skills standpoint, I think that, initially I was always the one who created the expectations and the culture within the four walls that we deliver in. And I'm not responsible for doing that anymore. I'm responsible for creating the culture for the people that create the culture, which is a completely different skill set. It's a completely different way to communicate. You're right, you have to surrender quite a bit. In terms of my own traits, I think that I've had to develop more patience. And I would say that I'm quite a patient person anyway. Like I don't get too frustrated if things aren't moving fast, but whenever the net widens and you're dealing with more and more people, you have to accept the fact that things are not going to move as fast as what you're used to moving them. So there's that. And then I said earlier on, you have to be resourceful, resilient, and relentless. Um, a lot of, I would say that my resilience muscle has had to grow as well, because whenever you're dealing with more and more people, it will also bring more and more problems as well. So, a lot of people will look at it and think, oh, you've got 6 franchises and you've got this gym and you've got this academy and everything else. But yes, I've also got more people who have more problems who will bring those more problems to you. And you have to, uh, you know, one example is the more people you add to your business, the more refunds you're going to have to issue. Like it is just a fact. And some of those refunds don't make any sense whatsoever. And it's just like, hey, it is what it is. We just gotta deal with this and let's move on. And sometimes it's not even me directly. It might be a franchisee in Lithuania who's dealing with something, and then I have to coach that person and how I would have dealt with it and how they might have dealt with it would be completely different as well. So there's just a whole layer of complexity that gets piled on top, which is epic as well. It's absolutely epic because I get to learn a lot about myself and the transition of skills, traits, and beliefs. You also have to, you also have to let go of what you believe to be true before, and that's a learning experience as well.
How's jiu-jitsu facilitated the evolution and the growth of MJ as a man, as a business owner, and as a leader?
Oh, that's such a powerful question, mate. So this is weird, right? So in the past, my first sport was I was an amateur boxer. And amateur boxing, it's an amazing sport. It's very self-serving as well, right? Uh, striking people. I mean, you could hurt someone, in fact, you do. You hurt people all the time in pursuit of your own athletic endeavors. So it is a very self-serving thing, and it's a very ego-driven sport as well. And the age that I was competing from I was 13 till I had my last fight when I was like 24. So in and around that age, it reflected who I was as a person. And then between the age of 24. I opened my gym when I was 26. And so then I went down the route of, well, I'm an entrepreneur now. I'm someone who does business. I don't hurt people. I help people. And so I stopped competing altogether, and I kind of fell out of love with combat sports in general because I'm like, I'm not here to hurt people. Like, that's the type of energy that I was bringing up. And then I was like, okay, this jujitsu thing, it's not that bad because I don't have to strike someone. I don't have to hurt them to uh worst case scenario, you're in, you get into some sort of confrontation. You can actually de-escalate it with jiu-jitsu. Like you can just hold someone down, put them in what's called a gift wrap, and they ain't going anywhere. And then you can talk them down, right? And so you can train in a combat sport without hurting someone. And not only that, not only do you get to develop your own athletic abilities, but in the process, you also get to help other people, right? The rising tide raises all ships. So the better you get, you can also make your training partners better, which unlike boxing, in boxing, sometimes the better you get, the worse it can make your training partners. They say iron sharpens iron. That's not always the case in boxing because if someone's showing up every day and they're taking an absolute pounding, which does happen, very quickly, your body can start to deteriorate and can go the opposite way, right? Whereas in jiu-jitsu, quite often, because it's such a chess match and someone's not getting hurt, it's easier to show up when you're not getting physically hurt, when you're not getting black eyes, when you're not getting a broken nose. And so it's very, like, it's something that can last an extremely long period of time. And although, don't get me wrong, it's tough, it's a challenge, but in the best way possible. And so I think that it is it's a reflection of where I am, but also it's also given me back the edge that a fighter has, right? So fighters carry themselves in a certain way. If you look at a fighter's gait pattern, and you look at their facial expression, they're a fighter. You look and you go, I ain't gonna fuck with that dude, right? And I think that I kind of lost that for a few years because I got lost in the whole game of entrepreneurship and I wanted to be this businessman and everything else. And I kind of lost myself in a sense because a big part of me was that I was a combat athlete. I was a fighter and there was no denying that. Look where I grew up. And I think getting back into jiu-jitsu and it's almost given me that edge back. And I love it for that reason. And I suppose the other thing is that the correlation between it and not just business, but life in general, the problems you have to solve, how it transfers and translates to almost everything that you'll deal with in life is just like spectacular. It's just absolutely, yeah, it's incredible. And there's a lot you learn about yourself on the mats as well. It's almost like who you are as a person will show up in your game of jiu-jitsu. And so I just think, yeah, it's an incredible sport to explore.
When we had dinner, MJ basically sat for about 3 hours just communicating with me as to why I should get into
Can I
jiu-jitsu.
do any more for you there?
Next thing, mate, sign me up. I'm in. I'm in. Send me your code. I'm 100% in. Final question that I just wanted to finish off with today, mate. And I massively enjoyed this episode. So, dude, in this conversation. So I massively appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you for having me, mate.
What has MJ changed his mind on recently?
What have I changed my mind on recently? Life, business, any particular area?
Anything? What did you have a certain perspective or worldview on that you now see through a different lens?
Okay. I think so in the past, and I have actually said this to people, you wouldn't want to, like, don't listen to someone who hasn't done what you want to do, right? And I think that I'm shifting away from that a little bit, right? I think fundamentally, I mean, if someone they're a bystander, they're on the sidelines and they've never actually been in the arena, then there's a good argument for that. But then at the same time, you can't read the label from inside the bottle either. And so I think that I'm shifting a little bit away from that advice that I ditched out so often. So I'm gonna say that I was wrong about that, because again, in the past I would have said to people quite often, like, don't take advice from someone who's not in the arena, because they haven't done what you want to do, and so they don't have experience in the thing. Yeah, I'm kind of shifting away from that a little bit. For I think the reason being is that they might see something that you don't, and their experience outside the arena might well provide some sort of valuable context. So rather than just not listening, still listen, but only use it where it's applicable. I think that's it.
Mate, I love that. And I hear you. I think it's offering just a different perspective and just allowing yourself to be open to now be recipient of it and just think, well, okay, is there anything in this? What's this giving me? And even if you can understand like their thought process behind it. And I think the great thing as well is that I really take from this is like, you're there. Sometimes people are there just to plant seeds and not change your mind.
Yeah.
And that's what I also think is like somebody would have said something to me years ago, and then you're like, meh, nah, don't agree with that, or that doesn't align, or what you on about. And then 3 years later, you're like,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, all right. And it just rears its ugly head, and you're like, oh, they were right. And actually, oh, I didn't see it through that lens at that time. So, mate, I massively value that thought process and that insight. MJ, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, dude. If the listeners want to find you, ECA, where should they go?
Yeah, you can reach me on Instagram at m_j_Lennon, or at ECA_Belfast. I'm pretty active on either of those pages. But Joe, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on here. You're an incredible dude. This community is extremely lucky to have you. I absolutely love your energy, and it has been a blast.
Mate, we should do this again. Thank you, brother.